President at PacificSource Health Plan, and he's been with PacificSource for 6 years. He's accountable for guiding strategy, deployment, and process improvement efforts. With senior leadership managers and employee teams, he provides group facilitation, process improvement, and leadership education and coaching. Prior to working at PacificSource, Matt spent 20 years at Hewlett-Packard's Inject division of various leadership and improvement consulting roles, and he also worked with 3M Medical and Lilly Biotech as an industrial engineer, facilitating organizational improvement. Matt's married with 2 daughters, one living in Boston and one living in Florida. Please welcome Matt.
Hi, everybody. Anybody come from out of state? I came from Corvallis, and I spend most of my time working in. Thanks for your travels on behalf of all your peers here today. Thanks for the chance to share. I'm not familiar with the chapter until I had a chance to speak with Amanda and with Evan. Personally, I look forward to sharing some of the experiences that we've had at PacificSource. Many of you in the audience are further on your journey, or maybe are having similar challenges. And so my hope is that, my hope is that I turn on the mic and that, oh, there's 2 here. Anybody say continuous improvement? Next time around, might be better. There we go. Thank you. They did what they needed to do. I failed in execution, so, okay. Thank you was my opening statement, and nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of the things we're doing at PacificSource. This may touch on some of the things you're doing in your industry. It may trigger some sharing between tables. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity here today. I'd like to talk a little bit about our continuous improvement journey. The process and the topics may be very familiar to you. What I'm going to do is walk through a couple of, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the company just so you have a sense of who we are. That'll be very brief. And then I'd like to walk into a discussion about our approach to continuous improvement, which may be similar to approaches many of you have in your organizations. I'd like to then just give a couple of examples. My goal is to spend no more than 20 minutes on some of the concepts and approaches that we're taking, and then just get into some, there are a lot of slides, but they're just pictures of groups of teams working together, and it might look similar to some of the huddles or activities that you have in your organization. Please feel free to, I don't know what method you're most comfortable with, but if you have questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand. We've got a mic runner. Thank you, Evan. We'll certainly save some time at the end, so you A, don't have to listen to me the whole time, and B, have a chance to ask some questions and before we break at 2:30. It is I am very aware of the fact that I'm between you and a break, so we'll wrap up by 2:30, and then you'll start again on the next session at 3 o'clock. The examples I have, there are some in our daily management system, and there are some examples specific to problem solving, which again might be familiar to you. And I'll wrap up with a couple reflections and questions. The PacificSource, founded here in Eugene, maybe like some companies in the room in 1933, a variety of benefit plans provided across commercial, Medicare, and Medicaid lines of business, operating in 4 states with multiple offices. We're small and growing. We've got about 300,000 members that we're working with in various communities throughout those 4 states. And we've just recently reached 1,000 employees. So there's a little bit of information for us. There's an office in Tigard, for example, and an office in Portland. We've got an office, 2 offices nearby, one in Eugene and one in Springfield. That's not a strategic decision. That was called, we ran out of space, so we opened another office. And anyway, a little bit about PacificSource. Sure.
We're going to move the mic closer to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
No.
That's what happened when you get rookies. Is that better? Okay. Cool. Many of you work in maybe healthcare systems. I'd like to give you just a brief overview of PacificSource. Some of the improvements that we're talking about are not only in kind of a traditional operations area that might be related to claims, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of the major enterprise processes where continuous improvement is going on. And again, it might be similar to your organizations. There are topics within business planning where we do our strategic planning and our annual IT planning, our budgeting processes. So there are executives and participants in those processes working on continuous improvement. Not unlike folks that are working on our contracts within our provider network team. Product development, as you know, we would go through an annual product development cycle. We have our sales and marketing, product development teams. This is not that I'm telling you anything you don't already know about an insurance plan, but just to kind of give you a scope of where the continuous improvement work is going on. The administration area, where we have customer service and onboarding of groups, membership, as well as claims processing, utilization management, care management. We also have our talent management process from the recruiting and hiring all the way through the onboarding, including the performance management and training and development and transitions if people choose to leave the company. So that whole life cycle for the employee is also part of our improvement scope. And as well as finance, monthly close, AP, AR, IT, help desk processes, etc. So part of what I'm trying to share with you is our intent is that it's part of everybody's job and that there are various processes, areas within the organization where this kind of continuous improvement work is going on. One of the things that's been helpful for us is that as a company and our values not only focuses on the customer, but focuses on teamwork and focuses on open communication, maybe not unlike some of your values for your teams or your organizations. But one of the things that was helpful from a structural standpoint is that 6 years ago, when we wanted to be a little bit more explicit about continuous improvement, the last value always said that we want to encourage creativity and we want to encourage innovation, but we added this statement of continuous improvement just so that within our company values, when we talk about living our values and we try to hold ourselves accountable to whether we're living our values, we can look specifically at not only executing our work, but trying to continuously improve our work at the same time. So this has been a helpful part for us. It may or may not be helpful in some of the work that you've been doing on continuous improvement, but this has been a nice foundation to be able to refer our improvement work back to our values. What I'd like to do now is just give you a couple slides that talks about our perspective and our approach. The real work here isn't so much I'm not trying to sell you on anything. It was just a question of how continuous improvement, we thought the principles of continuous improvement might be best rolled out in our company, in our culture. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of our perspective and our approach. Not that the principles are any different than what you might be doing, but it is helpful for us to think about how is it best applied to PacificSource and the culture that we have in our work. So a couple of slides. I mean, first of all, we recognize that continuous improvement it's certainly groups of people working together, and there are a lot of boxes and arrows and pictures and conversations and debates, but really what we started with, which has been helpful, is that we see it as cultural work and we see it as leadership development, that it's part of how we lead at PacificSource. And so, you know, continuous improvement being an ongoing effort to improve our customer value every day is, if you Google continuous improvement definition, you'll see something like that, right? And maybe you've even written one. But just starting with some of the fundamentals that we want to focus on customer value every day. And that it's not just about the outcome of the customer value, but that how we work together, the tasks and the activities that we do together, as well as how we treat each other impacts the outcome that we're generating, whether it's a clinical outcome, financial outcome, what have you, or an employee experience, member experience outcome. On the right, you see a circle. This is something that maybe you've bumped into with the Shingo Institute. I like this one because it talks about culture and the culture of continuous improvement. And in the slides following this, I would just like to share with you kind of the ABCD that goes around this circle. So there are 4 parts of kind of how we're trying to approach continuous improvement. The first one is focusing on the desired result. What are we trying, begin with the end in mind, that kind of spirit. The second one, which is at the top of the circle, says that there are guiding principles that we actually need from our middle and senior managers need to help advocate and live and promote some guiding principles to help make this work, not only to create it, but also to sustain it within the culture. The third one is letter C, says leadership practices. So we believe that there are practices that our leaders need to demonstrate and exercise on a regular basis and get better at it, as if it was a yoga practice or some other skill that you're trying to perfect. The idea was that in our leadership, there are 5 practices that we promote. And the first time you do a new practice, like a push-up, it hurts kind of that next day. But the intention is that as we practice these leadership practices, that the muscles aren't quite as sore and that the behavior becomes a little more second nature. And at the bottom, we have some enabling tools, whether it's a value stream map or this notion of 5 or 6S, whether it's flow charting, whether it's using data. There are certainly tools that many of you are probably familiar in and maybe even teach others, consult with. But the point of this picture, and again, I'll show you some examples that we use, is that in order to sustain the culture, we want to remind ourselves to focus on the desired result, which is A. We want to make sure we have some guiding principles that encourage and support improvement. We want to make sure that we build leadership competencies and that we provide enabling tools. And we think that these 4 things help to enable and sustain this culture so that it's not just an exercise, a meeting, or an event, but it's really part of our work culture. So our desired results, again, I have 4 quick slides going over each one of those circles. From our desired results, in some cases, depending on the organizational challenge, it might be different. If patient safety is a priority, maybe patient safety shows up in some organizations. In this organization, I've already mentioned that we were talking about leadership. We wanted continuous improvement to show up in our leadership style, in how we do our work every day. We wanted it to, the CEO said, I want to somehow build a community of problem solvers. And I want people to feel more comfortable solving problems every day. I want to give them the tools, create conversations where our leadership and our employee base all feel like they're better problem solvers. And part of what that means is I want people to be more comfortable with data. Some people are very not so comfortable with data, whether it's creating a bar chart or some other aspect of data. Some people are very comfortable, some people are less comfortable. So you can see some of the kind of, some of the motivations that kind of were guiding our work, this community of problem solvers. The idea that we wanted to execute our work. In our industry, in the insurance industry, there are a lot of people in the company who are very compliant. It's interesting and motivating to them to know what the rules are, and then they want to execute to the rules. So we have a lot of people within the organization that execute their job well. And what we're asking them to do is execute and improve your work. And that's a different thing sometimes. It's threatening for people. Maybe they haven't had conversations with their peers. Maybe they have and it didn't go very well. So these are just some of our desired results. One of the things that's been helpful that I'll talk about a little bit later is this notion that some issues are small and they impede the flow of work in little ways. Maybe they're pebbles. There are other impediments to our work that are bigger rocks. And there are even some that might need some innovations. Maybe we're doing something very manually with lots of paper and we think we need some kind of innovation. We like to think of those as boulders. This isn't a unique concept or notion, but the language has been kind of helpful to be able to triage problems, and whether it's a pebble or a rock or a boulder, we might do different things with that issue. And better every day is kind of just how we like to think about it, how we like to promote it. So there's our desired result. It's really about our leadership development and trying to create this community of problem solvers. Here's the statement that kind of brought home how we were trying to bring it into our daily work. The idea was to take lean principles, lean practices, and lean tools. So those three pieces were part of that circle that I just showed you, the principles, the practices, and the tools. To take those principles, practices, and tools and integrate it into our daily work. And our desire then, our desired result, was to have improved customer outcomes, improved operational outcomes, and better experience, better place to work for our employees. So that's how that shows up for us. And as you know, sometimes in conversation, it's just easier, better, faster, cheaper. And whatever that means to that team is kind of where we try to focus.
We're getting a little bit of feedback from the back. We're going to try something.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Try that.
Okay. Okay, so we've got, I'm just a few minutes from the approach and I'll get to some examples. Thanks for the chance to just kind of give you this foundation. So we've got this principle, the desired results, principles, practices, and tools, and we're trying to keep those in balance. I went through a little bit of the desired results. And here, the guiding principles, you may have written books or coached or educated folks on aspects of continuous improvement. The fact that it's more alignment, increased process flow, increased value for your customer, make sure you go to where the work gets done to learn, etc. These principles. What we liked about the lean-based improvement principles as part of our guiding principles is, of course, the customer focus. It's always been a part of what we do. And the systems thinking that it encourages as people think about their work. The fact that not only as you understand the system a little bit better, that you actually start to think about how do we get value through the system faster. So that's a third bullet of what seems to fit nicely with the fact that we're doing a lot of administrative transactional things. And so the focus of the improvement principles that Lean had that is related to flow seemed to fit nicely. And then just the fact that the social aspect of encouraging team and team learning and respect for everybody. It has a lot to do with what it means for employees to work at PacificSource, what's hard about working there, and what can we do to make that better is as much a part of the conversation as what a customer may have complained about on the phone. Both very important. So a little bit about our guiding principles. There are 5 leadership practices. There's a lot of text here, but later I'll show you some examples of how we try to incorporate these leadership practices into our work. But here's the list. The terms maybe don't matter so much, but this first one, strategy deployment, is really about, hey, in order to do improvement, you got to make sure you understand what your goals are and what it means for your team to win. Sometimes when we're working with a leader, a manager, a team leader, they haven't actually clearly articulated who their customers are and what their performance measures are. So that might be where we talk. The second one says, standard work, hey, in order to encourage improvement, let's endeavor to do things in a consistent way. Let's adopt the best current way. Whatever we do, let's do it imperfectly together. Because when we're going to improve, we want to build on a base that's common so that we can hold that improvement. So the second principle that we ask our leaders to practice and embody is the desire to look at our work and try to make it more standard for stability. The third practice is around visual management. That just says, hey, whatever's going on, make sure the issues and the progress are visible in simple ways so that your team feels accomplishment, so that your communication is improved, and so that leaders that are trying to support your team have a sense of where you are. The first one said, make sure you know what you're shooting for, like how to keep score. The second practice says, when you do your work, let's do it in a common way. The third practice says, hey, along the way, let's make sure your progress is visible. The fourth one, which is called daily improvement, is now that you know how to keep score, and you're exercising in a common way, and you know where you are, the fourth one is, if there are gaps in performance, what are you going to do about it? And the fifth one says, how can leaders behave more as coaches so that they can improve, they can help others improve how they address improvements. So to coach for improvement. These are the same principles you probably use in a hobby. How do I want to win at my skiing or whatever I'm doing? When I do it, I'm going to make sure I do something consistent with my knees, or I don't ski. And then I'm going to make sure I know what my execution status is. And then if there's some gaps against my goals, I'm going to do something about it. Same kind of thing. They just have names. So here's some text just trying to emphasize what I was just sharing. Strategy deployment for us is this cascading of corporate initiatives and metrics and making sure that that's really clear at every level of the organization so people's sense of how they're going to win is clear and that they're aligned. The next leadership practice, as I mentioned, is about just executing in a common way. We're not saying perfect, we're just saying imperfect together. Sometimes it's people within a team that are executing things differently. Sometimes it's people in different states that are executing in things differently. So it can show up in different ways. Visual management, again, this is just a statement. But when we're talking to our leadership, we're saying, hey, how can you make your issues and your progress visible in simple ways? Maybe you have huddles and visual boards in some of your locations. It's not any different than that. Daily improvement says, now let's do something about the gap. We don't want to be busy changing things if we're moving in the wrong direction. If we're all trying to go to Cleveland, let's make sure that we're not going to Phoenix, half of us going to Phoenix and half of us. So that's what we're trying to do, is say in order to improve, let's clarify our goal first, let's execute consistently, let's make sure we know where we are, then let's act on it, whether it's a pebble, rock, or a boulder, and then let's make sure we develop our leaders as coaches to help us along the way. Okay, later, much to your delight, later I'm going to show just a couple of examples of each of these practices and I'll just flash through them. Okay, as we went around that initial, I talked about desired results. We want community of problem solvers that are working together. Guiding principles, continuous improvement principles. Practices so that our leadership is part of this solution. Those were those 5 practices. And then, as you may be aware, that we have, these are desk references that we use for employees that talk about different ways to chart data, different ways to determine your department priorities, different ways to solve problems. So these are just desk references that are used. They're a kind of a collection of lean and continuous improvement tools that people can use for quick reference. Okay, let me just jump into, when we talk about those 5 practices, what I'd like to do is share with you a couple of examples of how those show up in our daily work. We are well into the beginning part of our journey. I don't know that we're in the advanced part of any journey, and so we're continuing to improve ourselves. So when I say LP1 at the top of the slide, not to be too cryptic, I just didn't have a lot of space. What I mean there is that's the first leadership practice. So leadership practice number 1, strategy deployment. This whole topic was about clarifying who your customers are. Every team leader is asked to draw pictures or lists or have a workshop with their team and clarify who are your customers, internal and external. How do they define winning? What metrics do you have in place to know whether you're meeting those needs? You guys do this all day long, right? This is part of your leadership DNA. Not all of our leaders have come up through the ranks knowing explicitly that thinking about this is an important part of managing. So we like to use this as an example. Second one, again, you may have a method in your organization This slide, in its busyness and the cascade, is supposed to show an example where the image at the top, number 1, I'm standing right in your way, aren't I? Number 1 is the strategic plan. And so what we're trying to do is have everybody's work recognized and people feel like the work that they're doing on a daily basis is connected to the direction of the company. So this cascade that you're seeing is a strategic work plan, and then there's some interpretation of the plan, number 2, specific for their department. And then number 3 says every quarter we're going to have our business review and we're going to talk about what improvements are really important for the next quarter. The rocks and the boulders, not the pebbles, because we handle that on a daily basis. But there's this notion of quarterly improvements for our team. What do we want to work on? That's number 3. And then number 4 says, hey, let's make sure we have a review with our team. Maybe you have monthly or quarterly business reviews with your team to talk about metrics and initiatives. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is cascade the strategic plan, its initiatives, and its performance metrics down to each individual team so that individual employees feel like they're part of something, some whole. And they also have metrics that are visible in the work area that connect to the higher objectives. So it's easy to draw the picture. Some teams have this wired. Their leaders are kind of linear thinkers and they've got spreadsheet cascades and all this kind of stuff. And other leaders, they handle it differently, but we still have the same challenge because when we do our employee engagement surveys at the end of the year, one of the questions is, do you feel like you know how your work is connected to the corporate strategy? And people sometimes say no. So strategy deployment is how we try to make that real for people. Let me talk a little bit about the second leadership practice, standard work. I've got 3 slides, again, just to give you an idea of how we're trying to put some of the tools into practice and how we're trying to challenge our leadership to adopt practices in the way that they lead their teams. We talked about standard work as being a way to encourage doing work the current best way. And this visual that you can't see much of, but just the intention is that we have a tool that we ask team leaders to do and a conversation to have with their teams where they might look at the process steps that they focus on in their organization. That might be the top of the spreadsheet. The columns are the steps in the process. And the rows become the different people or the different states. And then it's not quite a process flow. It's a high-level view of how do we do our work, and the coloring tells it where it's done the same or where it's done differently. In this particular visual, if you look down a column, that step in the process, which could be part of accounts payable, it could be part of enrolling a group, it could be part of managing a relationship with a customer. If it's the same color going down that column, it's done the same way. If it's different, there's a difference in execution, and then we get to talk about what the risk is and whether we're concerned about the difference. So anyway, it's just a tool that we're using. Some people call it a process matrix, but that's not really important. It's just that we're trying to give tools to our leadership so that they can assess how things are being done commonly and differently. Another example of enabling standard work has to do with training. So if you were really close to this picture, what you'd see, the columns on this training matrix are the tasks that are done by the individuals in a department. And then the rows are the people. And then the cells just document to what level of competency is a person trained on a particular task. And then what's the status of our procedures and policies associated with that work so that the team leader can help to improve the training readiness and the documentation readiness associated with any and all tasks. It's simple to draw, it's kind of hard to do, but this is another thing that we promote, this training matrix conversation within a team to help promote standard work. Lastly, on standard work, you may do this a lot, but we just encourage flowcharting for people to understand how the work is currently done, even if they're not making any changes currently, just to understand. So process flowcharts or some of those other matrices we use, and we encourage our leaders to use to help promote standard work. Okay, I'm at the third of the 5 principles. So, by the way, if you need to stand, because lunch was not so long ago, please feel free to do that. Okay, visual management. So, in the 5 practices, the first one said, make sure you know what your goals are and make sure they're connected to the goals within the company. And endeavor to get better at that over time. The second practice said, hey, when you do your work, try to do it in a common way. Because when we improve, we want to be able to improve it everywhere, not just for one person. This third one says, hey, make sure you have visual ways to show how you're doing. Issues, progress, accomplishments, success. I just have a couple slides that show different types of daily work. Are there organizations that have huddles either in clinics or administrative teams? Just some nods. So these things, again, aren't going to be unknown to you. But just to kind of share. So daily huddles, we think, are part of visual management, quick huddles in the morning to kind of align teams. These haven't always been done, so it was a big step in the right direction, I think, for our organization. Your huddles are daily, you're having a dialogue, and it's good to have some data. So the daily visual boards we have, depending on the team, they might be processing pre-authorizations, or they might be processing some financial document, or they might be processing a provider contract, what have you. There's some relevant statistics or data or cues that they might represent on their daily board. What's in our backlog? How old is it? How do we feel about it? What do we need to do today? Are we ready to do our job? There are other parts of our visual board which are still making things visual, but these are monthly trends. So some of you may have monthly metrics that you report to your management or you review with your team. This isn't any different than that. This is just saying, be sure that on a daily basis you think about what it means for your team to win and that you can share how you're doing. And then it means something to the team. This slide says, hey, and oh, by the way, every month there's a subset of data that you need to clarify, whether it's related to service, whether it's related to quality, whether it's related to timeliness, whether it's related to compliance, what have you. And so visual pieces that we use that, again, maybe some of you, many of you do as well. What we don't like to encourage is wallpaper. So if it doesn't mean anything to the team, if you think you're doing it because someone asked for it 2 years ago, maybe there's an opportunity to just take it down. Another piece of visual management, which I'll talk about in a second and under another practice, is this idea board. So imagine huddles. Every morning, 8:25, there's a huddle here for 10 minutes. They're looking at the daily board. On a monthly basis, they might review their monthly metrics in a similar way. Every Wednesday at 10:30, they might have a 20-minute huddle at their idea board. I think organizations do this in a lot of different ways. This board, this dialogue, this huddle is about helping to manage employee-generated ideas and to encourage employee engagement in every team. So, not unlike processes you may have, it kind of goes like this for this particular visual. On the left side, please post any idea you have at any time. In the middle, it says, these are the ones we're working on right now as a team that we've agreed to in our huddle. Please don't feel overwhelmed to work on all improvements at the same time. There's a lot more on the left than there are in the middle. And they might even say, let's work on 3 to 5 things at a time. We're not going to have some cognitive overload called, I'm already busy, how am I going to work on all these improvements at the same time? So you have your huddle and you're deciding what goes into the middle, what improvements are most important that we're working on right now. These ideas, these improvements, the idea isn't that they give them to the team leader. The idea is the team leader would increasingly help coach the employee on how to move this idea forward as a problem solver. And then on the right, yay, done. So if you could read the top of the titles of those different colors, you know, the left, it says post stuff here anytime, choose a few to work on in the middle, celebrate wins, and once you pull one out of the middle, pull another one out of the queue. It's encouraging improvement, it's encouraging engagement. It's not the only way to do it. Some people have lists on SharePoint, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is we like to make it visual and we like to make it dialogue and collaboration. Okay, so that's just another example of trying to be better at this visual management practice. Okay, so I said there were 5 practices. We try to get better every day. Every leader is at a different place in their journey. And when they start doing push-ups for the first time, it hurts a little bit. And over time, they help each other and coach each other. But there are these 5 practices that we base everything on. The 4th practice, now that you know in simple ways where you're missing your performance, where you have gaps, this 4th one is about how we improve. This is where we talk about pebbles, rocks, and boulders. So pebbles, for example, you're using these idea boards that I mentioned, and you can see one of the team leaders and employees at the board. Again, it's a 20-minute quick chat. How are we doing? Which one can we move forward? Yay, let's grab another one. But it's an example of how we encourage small things better every day.
Just a question for you in regards to making it visible. Do you have any employees that are in a work group that aren't necessarily together where they can just walk over to the board? And what are you doing to make that visible to them?
Yeah, perfect. It is a challenge. We've got a couple teams. So this is the same challenge with the daily boards as well, right? As you can imagine. People mount speakers, first of all, so that they might have a phone call and with a speaker mounted at the in the hallway where they have their huddle. So that's the first part. The second part is they might actually endeavor, they take a picture of the daily board where the main team is, and they distribute that picture to people that are located remotely so that they have a photograph, an image, electronic image of the board. If the teams split kind of 50-50, some teams actually mirror the board so that they have the same board in multiple locations. Other teams get tired of that and they go to a SharePoint list and they get on the phone and then they're sitting next to each other, but they're all at their separate desks. And we don't like to encourage that because the collaboration part falls apart. But yeah, so people kind of struggle with that distributed nature of teams. But with pictures, duplication of boards, and sometimes online lists, that's how they try to mitigate that. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if some of you lead or are part of IT organizations. If you have IT organizations that work in a way called Agile, an Agile-based project management, it's the same principle, and that is they have sprints, they have development sprints, and they're trying to deliver value to their customers in a rapid succession. So they have the same kind of principle where they have a backlog of things they can do. They pick a couple to do for that period. They celebrate the win. They go back and they pull some more. So anyway, so for Pebbles, we use these boards. We have huddles on an ongoing basis. There are some other parts of daily improvement, this practice that we promote that have to do with, okay, not all problems or ideas are little things that you can test with your work area. Sometimes they're a little mysterious, they're more involved, there's tension because teams might not like to work together. Those more complicated problems like the rocks and the boulders, that's in the next part that I'd like to share with you. So in daily management, in the leadership practice number 4, this has to do with encouraging small changes every day and encouraging people to experiment with changes in their work area. As they get more complicated, I'll show you a couple examples of what we're doing. As far as leadership practice 5 goes, so I'm at the end of the list. This is all in our daily management system. We said in leadership practice 1, we're trying to clarify what our daily goals are. In leadership practice 2, every day, we're trying to encourage standard work, and sometimes we use those documents in the training matrix to help us along the way. Number 3 says we use boards, visual idea boards, daily boards, monthly boards to try to understand where we are, how we're doing. And then we have daily improvement exercises to try and improve that. This leadership practice 5 is kind of how is it that as a leader you do things to encourage all those other practices to work well. what we have that's part of our leadership training work, but we're also trying to improve it over time, is you see here, but of course you can't read, 5 different checklists. And this says, in order to encourage continuous improvement, in order to encourage team building, in order to improve the flow of work, what should we be doing as a leader? Again, we've got a community of folks that are used to being compliant, and they're good at it. So one of their responses is, don't talk to me about concepts. Tell me what I should do. So the top one there says, on an annual basis, in order to encourage improvement, teamness, breakthroughs, clarity, etc., do these things on an annual basis. The next one down says, on a quarterly basis, endeavor to do the quarterly improvement roadmap, endeavor to do your quarterly business review. And then on the right side, it says, what about on a monthly reviews? The second one down says, weekly, how do you encourage ideas? And the last one says, on a daily basis, what should I do to encourage improvement? So we're not trying to be mechanistic, but we're also trying to be, and we don't want people to just be obedient to a list, but we're trying to make it a little explicit about, okay, I'm in, but what do you want me to do as a leader to encourage improvement of my processes and improvement of my employees? And we try to use what we call leader standard work. And again, it's not our term, but you may use something called standard work for our leadership, or leader standard work, to try and describe how we want people to behave, show up, experiment with continuous improvement. All right. I need a drink. Of water. Okay. I talked a little bit about hi, we're PacificSource, which matters less. I talked a little bit about our approach, and I shared the desired results, that principles were important, that we had leadership practices, which I've showed some examples of, and enabling tools. And then we walked through maybe some examples of how some of those practices show up on a daily basis in our daily work. I'd like to show you a couple examples of some problem solving, but before I do that, any questions? Or maybe you've nailed this and you're 3 times ahead of this in your organization and you want to share something, but is there any comments about how you've tried to incorporate improvement into the daily muscle of your organization? Just give somebody a chance to share if you're wanting to share or comment or ask a question. All right, I'll keep going because I know there's a break on the other side of the slide deck, so I'll keep going. Leadership practice 4, we talked about idea boards, and that idea boards are a dynamic that we use and promote to get direct involvement from all of our employees all the time, everybody, everywhere, every day. And that addresses some of the problems, opportunities, ideas that people have. As you know, have managed and maybe led in your organizations, there are other problems that are bigger. So what we have, and we use in our leadership education and development program, again, we're trying to make this all part of our leadership development, is a method that isn't perfect. It's not the only one. There's a lot out there. This happens to be one we picked. Focus PDCA. What I like about it is it seems simple in the sense that it's easy. So first of all, we're trying to focus. And PDCA, plan, do, check, act. The Deming cycle, the improvement cycle, encouraging people to experiment and to learn through doing. So if you take the focus and the experimentation together, it doesn't matter if I like it, but I do like that. The focus part of the methodology says, find an opportunity, that's the F, organize a team, clarify the current state, understand variation, select ideas to test, and then go through PDCA cycles to test ideas and learn and implement or not together. So again, you may have DMAIC or other problem-solving methods that you might use. Totally great. For us, it was helpful just to pick one. And I wanted to share that with you, that part of our leadership education, in order to encourage daily improvement, is that we encourage people to use a focused PDCA kind of method when they deal with bigger, more mysterious problems. What I'm not saying is everyone, when they have their idea board and they're trying to move a Post-it to done, we're not saying everybody's got to use this for all the smaller ideas, but for what you might think of as rocks and boulders that are impeding flow, then we encourage this. And again, what we're really trying to do is to keep people from jumping right to the solutions. We're trying to help people understand root cause. We're trying to help encourage people to use data like many of you may do instinctively every day. Along with that focused PDCA, again, tools you've used for a long time, you know, there are control charts and there are scatter plots and there's variance analysis tools, so forth, that go into quality analysis. What we've been using in our organization is more kind of a beginning stage, which is we use checklists. We encourage people to checklists to manually collect data. We encourage flowcharts. We encourage run charts, a bar chart or a Pareto chart. Those tend to be the ones that our employees and our team leaders use most frequently. But anyway, we try to encourage the use of data as people go through the F, O, C, U, and S method. Okay, 3 examples of some problem-solving stuff that may represent things you've done every day. Yeah?
This question. So what tools are you using to capture the little post-its? So obviously you have your data. The other team members are putting it into some chart somewhere. Was it getting completed?
Yeah, great question. If I said it depends, would you believe me? Okay. It's a great question. Thank you. First of all, some teams are more comfortable with this whole thing. Some teams are less comfortable. Some teams, for data, are waiting for IT to create a report, and once they get the report, then they'll feel smarter and they'll be able to act on it. And that's valuable. But what we're also trying to encourage is, if you need to collect data on a whiteboard and do check marks to create the Pareto chart for what kind of errors are being made most frequently, then let's get up and get it to board. So there's a combination of trying to get people, like, if we could collect our own data, while we do wait for something better, like a report, we do try to encourage people to use a checklist by their table, a whiteboard where they do check marks through the day. So it really does depend on their comfort of the data. As teams progress, they might get reports from our transactional systems that give them a little bit more insight. Very few teams have online automated, like, production input or output. Very few of them have automated charts that show up as run charts, for example, on a daily basis. We typically need to create those manually. Questions? Examples where you have it nailed? Anyway, did that answer your question? Yeah? Okay. All right. So this guy up front is rambling about problem solving. It's just one of our practices. And in addition to the idea boards, we're trying to help team leaders and managers in particular be facilitators of teams to solve problems. Here's just a few examples. You guys have done this, I'm sure, many times, which is I'm doing the C part of focus, which is documenting my current state or understanding root cause. This is just an example. In this case, there was a 50% reduction in how we implemented contracts. You can imagine people in a room debating on merits, talking about small things and big things that they could do to improve the process. This is another example. When we process claims and we send the claims explanation of benefit to the member, and we send a claims explanation of payment to the provider, we also have an accountability to submit that claims experience to the state. And the state sometimes says, no, we don't take that claim yet because we're missing some data elements. This is our encounter. We're submitting encounters to the state. This happens to be one of those processes. You can see vaguely in the graphics, you can see number one, hey, what's the transaction? What's the data that's flowing between all the organizations that are trying to get this done on a daily basis or on a weekly basis? Hey, 2, what does a better future state look like? 3 is a list of improvement opportunities that might be hard but high value, or they might be easy and high value. But anyway, there's a list of ideas and opportunities that we get from the staff that's actually doing the work. And then on the 4th over there, one of the things we did before we got into Focus PDCA, but we use it as a visual management tool. You ever been in a management meeting and you're like, hey, that dot has been red for 3 months, and I'm still not sure who's doing something about that dot? We do that. In order to encourage accountability, not punitive stuff, but accountability on who's addressing the red dot and where are we. We have a visual tool where on one slide you can say, what are we monitoring and what's the problem? What are the root causes? What are the countermeasures that we're working on right now? And what has been implemented? So if you go, we call it 4C. I'm not selling it. I'm just saying as a visual tool to help encourage communication and accountability, we say, what's the count? What are the current causes? What are the countermeasures? And what corrections have been made? And we just try to encourage that visual tool to say, I got the red dot. This is what we know and what we don't know. So just an example. We didn't start with all these opinions of what we would use. It's just, we've just been kind of doing work, and we find some tools that work, and we say, hey, let's promote that. Okay, we're still in this daily improvement thing. We talked about idea boards, which were like the small things. We talked about things that are a little bit more complicated, and I showed you a couple of examples of mapping. This is an example, similar mapping, same kind of focus approach. What's our current state, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, you can see the flow chart where people were envisioning a future state of how we onboard groups and how agents could actually go onto an electronic portal and select their intentions as opposed to filling out paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. And so in number 3, you can see what we call a 7 alternative matrix, which is a way to have our requirements of our process design in the rows. And then the columns become brainstormed ideas of how that requirement could be met. And then the team says, you know, what do they want to experiment with? So again, I'm not selling the method or the tool, but the practice is how we get better every day. The tools are things like this 7 alternatives matrix that are helpful, has been helpful for us, or flow charting as another tool. In this case, we continue to improve, but we went from over 10 days, sometimes 14 days, down to 2, and I think there were 20 groups yesterday that went through in 2 hours. And there are kind of, it works in this case, but it doesn't work in this case. But if we're talking about getting better and a better customer response, it's encouraging. It's encouraging for the employees, and it's encouraging for the customer. We're getting there. I'd just like to reflect a little bit on kind of our journey and welcome any thoughts or comments that you might have. Again, I think these reflections are pulled from the work that has been talked about. But let me give you just a moment to read that while I grab a drink of water. We started out talking about our approach and that we didn't want it to just be about, we want to get better and let's go throw some tools at it. It was important that we're tied to our company vision, our company values include continuous improvement. If the question here for me was on our own journey, what what has worked. And again, I do think it was a question of our organization gets stuff done and how we would encourage improvement there. The way one company makes it happen. But when I worked at HP, for example, much more analytical collection of people, right? We've got research and development engineers, we've got manufacturing engineers, we've got process engineers, they're developing software, they're developing hardware, they're developing tools. Definitely a community of people that want more rigor, they want more data, they do this stuff all day, every day. So if I took this collection of stuff and I said, hey, I want to do some improvement here, that organization might go, might look at me kind of funny because it's not how they do work. But at PacificSource, I found that the connection to our company values and governance was key. And it's one bullet, but we have product lines, yeah? Whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, commercial. And within commercial, we serve individuals, we serve small groups, we serve large groups, we serve employers that are self-funded, so they're paying the claims and we're just an administrator for them. We service students that are in universities, the student groups. So there are different flavors of product lines. In a hospital setting, I don't know from experience, but I understand that in our case, if we have product lines where the profitable growth exists, that's where we're thinking the profitable growth and how do we improve our processes to enable profitable growth. We think of our product lines in a hospital environment, they might be service lines. That might kind of be the analogy where how's the geriatric kind of service line working, or how's orthopedics working, or how is oncology working as a service line, as a profitable service line. What I'm trying to say is not only doing improvement for improvement's sake, but being accountable to the line of business leaders that are trying to make the care, the cost, the service work for that product line has helped to give importance and urgency to what have you done for me lately, and to help keep continuous improvement moving. A tie to some senior leadership that's asking, how are we getting better every day as a product line or as a service line in maybe a hospital setting case. One of the things that's different is we didn't used to have line of business leaders. We did not have senior VPs or VPs that were responsible for particular product lines. Once we created, like in some hospital systems, I understand that you might have a service line manager, service line director, and they have to work across all of the different departments in order to make that service line more profitable, more successful. That may or may not be a business model that you use, but the point is we had some new roles and some organizational changes that have come about as a result of this work. Second bullet, our focus on leadership, I think was helpful. The fact that we're promoting improvement, but it's the way we lead and the way we work, not just events. These aren't just episodic kind of occurrences where groups of people get in a room and draw a picture. What we're trying to do is say this is the way we lead and work at PacificSource, because executing and improving daily work is part of the work. I think you lead probably in the same fashion. We were just trying to be really explicit about it. I think we have found for us that as we engaged with team leaders or managers or directors that wanted to make stuff better, that almost regardless of where we started, because we will try to meet them where they are. If their metrics aren't clear, let's go talk about metrics. If their standard work is kind of all over the place, let's go there. If their visual management isn't, in other words, here's the menu, which appetizer do you want to start with? That means the entry point can be really different depending on the challenges for our leadership. And so we try to encourage, let's start wherever the pain point is. Regular huddles. There's so much here. It almost sends the wrong message, Because the fact is, if we were an intact team and we said, let's have a 15-minute huddle about what was hard last week, we've already started. And we don't need that. So I appreciate the chance to go through that. But in part of the reflection, it's like a little desire, some data, some dialogue, right? And then a willingness to do about it. When you come up with 10 ideas, let's just pick one and work on it. So I think the fourth bullet, just getting started, doesn't take a lot of tips, tricks, techniques, just a little desire and some data and a desire to actually want to know what's not working. Some teams run out of ways to talk about it. Okay, I'm having my idea huddle. I'm not sure how to keep it fresh. Sometimes we just use trigger words. What was annoying? What's broken? I'm trying to go through the alphabet. What's confusing? Where are the delays? Where were you excited? Where did your excitement go away? Anyway, so it might just be, there might be a red dot. There might be a compliance issue. There might be a financial gap. There might be a customer service complaint. There are a lot of things that could cause these teams to talk together, but sometimes you just run out of steam and you're like, I don't know where to go. What was hard yesterday? What was hard last week? Sometimes is a good place to start. Okay, when we were trying to think, God, how do we start? Then October came around like this a number of years ago. And I was amazed at all of the Halloween decorations that showed up everywhere in the company. I mean, streamers and this and creatures and costumes. And the thought was like, well, there's a lot of creativity in these teams. Visual boards may not be a bad place to start. Hi, team. What's it mean for you to win today? What measures do you use? What do you mean? You know how you do all that stuff at Halloween? Let's create a board that represents your team and shows how your team's doing. I mean, the point is, there were some things, there was something about the DNA of the way everybody was working together that kind of said, visual tools might be a good place to start. One of the things we also do to try to promote, and again, this isn't unique, but it's certainly part of what we try and promote, is that leaders get up and walk to the work area to find out how things are being done. It's not to say that electronic reports aren't helpful, but you'll see the CEO, the senior VPs, and a couple directors at any location walking the workflow of the company. They'll go to grievance and appeals. They'll have an hour and a half or 2 hour walk. And part of this is to keep them informed about what's going on in the company. It also keeps them a little close to the staff. And the staff are basically stops along the way. And there's 5 or 6 minutes where they get to tell a story about what they're excited about, what they're struggling with. They're not going to talk about everything on their board, but they're going to talk about a little bit. So here we are. We're at grievance and appeals. We find out about what provider grievances and appeals are coming in and what's the trend there. And in the last quarter, where have people been struggling the most? And we ask the same about members, and we see some data, and we get some information. And then we walk over to HR, and we learn about training and development, and how many people have been hired, and how many recruiting efforts are going on. And then we walk over to claims, and we see how many claims we have in backlog and how old they are and where we're stumbling. And we walk over to customer service, and we say, hey, are we answering the phone within 30 seconds with a live person? Are people abandoning the call because they were tired of waiting? What's the status of our customer service metrics? Then we might go to membership and say, how are we doing on applications? Are we getting them through? How are we doing in pre-authorizations? Are they getting through in 24 hours? So there's these walks. And what we find is it's not only educational for the leadership to know what's going on in the business, because of course you can't do that every day, but it's certainly helpful to sustain these visual boards that the teams are working on. Those are the leader walks. One of the directors on a monthly basis now takes her team leaders on an idea board walk. So the team leaders, there are 8 of them under this director. They're all doing enrollment and billing related stuff in the commercial line of business, but they'll walk and they'll look at each other's idea board and they'll talk about where they are. So different flavors of walks. And these aren't like obedient things. These are dynamics that people have found have been helpful in terms of encouraging improvement and team dynamics. Oops. You got excited for a minute, didn't you? You're like, hey, that's his last slide. I am almost done. Quick and easy idea boards, great way for us to encourage employee engagement and problem solving. It's not sufficient in and of itself, but it's been helpful for us to hear from our staff. We waited a while before we picked a common problem solving method. I'd pick it earlier if we were going to do it again, but picking one is helpful. And there's no perfect one, but I think in reflection, it's like, yeah, we should have done that earlier. And it's good to have one that we rally around. And if someone uses a different one, no harm, no foul. But more facilitated events. So sometimes, whether it's a 2-day or whether it's a 4-hour or whether it's an all-day, some of these more complicated issues need time. I don't know that there's been an intention to do a pretty significant improvement event every quarter. And I really haven't kept that pace. And I'm not the only one that would do it. Or we're not the only ones that would do it. So it's about helping other leaders do the same thing, right? So, but more facilitated events are helpful. They're not necessary for all problem solving. And as I may have mentioned a couple times, that was maybe helpful or not helpful. The imagery of the flow of water, we're trying to get value to our customers. I don't care what it is, something is flowing through our offices. And the idea is that there are pebbles, there are rocks, and there are boulders that are impeding that flow. And the customer wants to drink. And it's like, what are we doing to remove the impediments to flow? The idea of being able to say pebbles, rocks, and boulders, where we have a dynamic for pebbles, we have problem solving for rocks, and we have annual initiatives and strategic planning for boulders. It's helpful. It was helpful for us to triage issues. Anyway, that's just some of my reflections. Next steps. In some of those boxes that I talked about earlier, we want to have more VP stewardship over those kind of enterprise processes. And we want those VPs to help create more business roadmaps of where they want that piece of the business to go over time. We'd like to get better at that. We'd like to provide some more tips and tricks for our teams to help encourage problem solving and the use of data. And some of that is, in some cases, maybe we even want a board that's not just the daily board. It's a more advanced technique, but it would be during the day, are you moving things through the office at a pace that's consistent with your plan and with the customer demand? So there might be something like an input-output visual board that people use. Some people call it a progression board that people would use within the day. We don't have any of those currently. So these might be some areas that we noodle on and think about and experiment with and pilot. All right, that's you, because now I don't need to speak. No, I just want to ask questions. So thank you again for the opportunity. My hope is that maybe there's someone here that's further along in their journey or on a similar journey, and if I have a chance to build my network and connect with someone else, we like to continue on our learning journey. But thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. We've got a few minutes. I wondered if you have any questions either about the first bit was kind of how we were approaching it. The second bit was around that included the leadership practices, or kind of how we're using it in a daily or daily management or in our problem solving. Any questions or comments or experiences that people are willing to share? How many people have daily boards or something like that somewhere in the organization? And maybe, yeah. And I mean, in general, have you found those to be helpful in a similar way, or anybody willing to share? Yeah.
So we have a series of daily huddles at visual management boards, and it comes from a frontline staff, and then it goes to a supervisor manager level, and then it goes to a
Cool.
senior VP. So things can roll up, roll down on a daily basis, and then we separate it from quick hits and big issues, where a quick hit is less than a 3-day resolution, ideally, and a big issue or a boulder or rock would be
Okay.
the plus, and then they're all tracked with metrics.
Awesome.
And we have probably close to 56% remote employees
Okay.
that work from home or independent offices. So we put a lot of ours online and do a shared link kind of system.
Perfect.
Not necessarily ideal, but it's shared amongst everyone.
Right. Sounds like similar stuff and even a little bit more rigor in what you've got. Have you found I like the 2 buckets that you mentioned. Tell me again, it was big hits and quick issues. My guess is you found that separation to be helpful. Like, does it go in this bucket or this bucket?
Yeah, so, on ours, which is tracked, we just have it, and ideally, the quick hits are, again, less than 3 days. If for some reason there's a barrier or something that needs to get, further detailed into it, we'll sometimes move to that big issue.
Okay.
And then obviously those big issues that sometimes can't get resolved in a timely manner, that might become a Kaizen or like a half-day, full-day event.
Yeah.
We're bringing frontline staff to kind of troubleshoot and
Perfect.
get to the root cause and try to come up with solutions.
That's perfect. Thank you. I like the clarity of all that. Thank you. Anybody else? Daily stuff, daily huddles, daily boards. Tried it, don't like it. How about problem solving? Oh yeah, back.
Daily huddles, we initiated it not too long ago, and I think things changed quick enough, and we were doing a Friday meeting, and I find that the daily huddles are much more productive. Ideas come up quickly instead of, oh yeah, I'll talk about that Friday, then you forget.
Okay.
Basically just saying that the daily huddles have been very effective for us, and there are some things that needs to come from management and such, but then it's also an open forum for the team to express concerns, improvement ideas,
Cool.
best practices, that kind of thing.
And the issues can come up, kind of work of the day or issues, as you were saying, might come up in that same forum.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we it's a small team, we all work close together, but still you're so focused on what you're doing that a lot of times communication is missed anyway, or, oh yeah, that was decided yesterday. So, it is a great opportunity to keep everybody informed and get their input as well.
Thank you. How about problem solving? I spoke to a hospital system, I think it was at Duke. They have 100 people in their performance services organization. Different organizations address this different ways. These 100 people were combinations of clinical staff and management engineers, industrial engineers, whatever. But one person kind of had a business and organizational focus, and the other person had a clinical focus. And they had pairs or groups of 4 people that would be in service to a particular VP, whether it was a hospital, a physical hospital, or whether it was an oncology workflow or what have you. Not all organizations have that. So I certainly have seen, and 3M, when I worked there were a group of engineers that tried to support factory plant managers. They had general managers, and the general managers would hire free electron, warm-bodied extra people, and they'd work with the factory staff. I wonder in some of your organizations, in terms of the problem solving, do you have dedicated staff that are helping to run Kaizen events and other events? Do you have a combination of coaches and facilitators, but also business leaders that are becoming coaches? And I'm just curious, and maybe you don't use Focus PDCA, maybe they use Six Sigma tool approach like DMAIC or something like that. Anybody willing to comment kind of what you've found in problem solving, either how it's done or if you use a method of a different name. Yeah.
We use, for like problem solving, something that's been really effective within our organization is really process mapping it out, and process mapping the entire process, do the value stream map, look at each one of the decision points in there, and just start asking why along the process. And we
Awesome.
talked about including different people from different parts of the organization. They're going to bring insights and be able to talk to the end result, or if you do it this way in your part of the organization, that affects us positively in this part of the organization. We've seen a lot of benefit.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And the leader, the folks in the organization that would help encourage that.
We have a lead leader within the organization.
You have a lean leader, so you have kind of a resource to pull from. Cool. We just have a few minutes. Any other questions? Yeah.
And Jason, I didn't hear exactly what you said at the beginning. We didn't have your mic, which is a surprise. But I would love to hear from everybody else. For those who have remote users, you said you're using software to connect them. I'd love to hear what everyone's using as far as software. I know that our organization just recently started using free Trello.com. It allows us to put stuff up there and or share and see the progress. But I didn't know if there was maybe a better application that we should be looking
Nice.
at. So I wanted.
Yeah, how about Slack? Take a look at Slack. That's pretty awesome technology for
If you were an IT,
international and domestic coordination.
now, I don't know the tool, but just a question. If you were an IT team and you had a backlog of stuff that you were working on,
Yes.
or if you were a production or an administration team and you were organizing ideas, would it be something that you could use in either case? Or maybe could you say a little bit more about Slack?
Well, I'm not an investor in Slack, so I'm not here to pitch.
No, that's
But I've been using them for about 18 months. I've used everything that exists. Oh, I have a big mouth. I didn't know you couldn't hear me, but Slack is actually a technology, one of many that I've used for not just software development, but also tracking issues with existing customers, future clients. It's easy to use. It's really, it's out of the box.
Perfect.
I think it's free. I think it's free. Don't quote me. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to pay for things, so I think it is. But the point is, people use it.
yeah.
Right? There's a lot of wonderful technology out there that people don't use. So Slack is another.
Perfect.
I can tell you which ones to stay away from. Separately.
Yeah. Thank you.
Got the mic. I know.
Last question or something that you've used in your organization that you like? Yeah.
I have one question for you, which is, did you do formal lean training or certification with the folks in your organization, or were you a cohort of them? What's your approach to
Good question.
formal training?
Yeah, I've been in organizations where we've done it both ways. Within PacificSource, we didn't start there. We started with teams, and we just, what we're doing now, which I think we could have done earlier, was, no, not formal, beginning at PacificSource. In other organizations, I've been part of the white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt situation. But what our CEO said this: is there a way to just do it and not talk about it? I was like, can you say more? And where it was coming from, which led to kind of the informality as we began, was I don't want people to feel excluded because, and I'm not saying it has to be this way. He's saying what I'm worried about is people will fail to engage because they haven't been to the class. And he, as a person, is very inclusive and was concerned that in our language, we would exclude people. And so his initial request was, hey, let's do whatever makes sense long term. But when we get started, can we just start? And anyway, I'm not promoting it one way or the other. What we are doing now, is twofold that Rob's working on quite a bit, is we do have, for new employees, we have a series of like 1.5 hour exercises, part of our customer connections, which is for our new employees. And there's a session in there on continuous improvement. We have a series of videos that's kind of self-service that says, hi, continuous improvement, it focuses on our customers. We want to think about how our work gets done. We want to make our work flow faster. We want to do this together and respect each other. And we want to keep doing it every day to get better, right? It's kind of this introductory video introduction, which would be kind of like the white belt introduction to. In our leadership development program, it would be the closest to kind of the yellow belt introduction to tools. We take them through not only the daily management and the problem solving, but we go into some of the tools. Hey, in the step F, you might consider using a charter and some of these other tools in an O, in a C. So we have come to more of that kind of structure. We don't formally anoint people with the levels, but we certainly find that introductory education is helpful so that people, you know, sometimes Rob and I think have both been in conversations, and you too, I suppose, whether we say, hi, we're here to like help. And people look at us and they say, did we do something wrong? Or we ask them, well, they say that they were hesitant to share upon reflection after a workshop. And I say, if you're comfortable, could you share with me a little bit about why you were uncomfortable sharing? It would help me. And I expected it to go, oh, the team leader this or the team leader that. And this person says, well, last time I came up with an idea, you should have seen the looks I got from my peers in my department. I'm not doing that again. And it's just interesting, you guys have experienced this too, but as you endeavor to do this work together, there's a very strong social component to, did I do something wrong? And is there risk associated with wanting to change how work is happening today? Yeah.
So we also, oh wait.
Oh yeah.
No, Jeff, I don't want to.
So we do a combination of approach. What we kind of just do from day one, ground running. We have new staff partake in huddles, daily management reports. We also have our evolution kind of new gamble walks for those visiting sites where they get out of their offices and go really talk to employees from the front line, like what do you need from me today? What's your barriers? How can we help? So they, day one, kind of are involved. But we also have within a 6-month period, all new hires have to take like lean principles class, which is like an hour. We have a quality improvement analyst who runs these for us. So we're super lucky and fortunate. And then she also does like a 2-hour CAP training class, and new employees that go through that, and they all do a CAP project as part of that class that they come out with and collaborate and work on. So we kind of do a twofold, where day one, you go to the huddle and you kind of learn and move on, but we do offer educational opportunities with lean principles and CAP training.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Did I give you the, yeah, okay. You can't see this, but in our PacificSource University, the 5 practices that we're trying to get better at show up in the columns, and these boxes are kind of learning modules. And so depending on whether we're trying to talk about daily management or problem solving, which are the yellow and green in the middle, those are kind of the topics that are part of our learning curriculum and our leadership training. And then the stuff we'd like to do more that's a little bit more advanced is kind of on the right. What I didn't talk about, but that's not important, is the quarterly kind of work we do with the executive team on doing our strategic plan and cascading our strategic plan within the company and getting better as a leadership team on how they act as a team and how they improve budgeting, strategic planning, product life cycle, et cetera, et cetera. So the executive team needed to understand that they have processes that they're accountable for, and they work on improving those at the same time. So thanks for that example. It's cool. I think you're at a break. Unless there are any other questions, I wanted to say thank you again for the chance. I think most of all, thank you for the sharing, because what you guys know yourselves about this kind of stuff is more important than what some guy put on a couple slides. So thanks for the sharing. It's great for me personally, but also for your community of learners. I appreciate you sharing. And thanks for the chance to be here today.